Welcome to Life Stories, where real voices and raw emotions come together to inspire, heal, and empower. In today's episode, we bring you the unforgettable journey of a woman who lost everything and then built something even greater from the ruins. A quiet wife, a shocking betrayal, and a powerful transformation that will leave you breathless. Subscribe now to follow this emotional story of strength, love, and rediscovery. Let's begin today's story with Life Stories. I never imagined the man I married would become a stranger I could barely recognize. When I met Daniel Carter, he was a quiet, practical man. A high school math teacher in a small Vermont town, he had slightly crooked glasses and a deep preference for dry toast and black coffee. He wasn't charming in the traditional sense, but he made me feel safe. I was working at the town library then, still aching from the loss of my father. My life had slowed down, and Daniel's calm, thus steady presence was comforting. We weren't glamorous, but we made sense. We fit. For nearly 20 years, we lived in a modest two-bedroom house with creaky wooden floors and mismatched furniture that we never replaced. Life was simple, predictable. I gave up the idea of a career early on. We agreed his teaching salary would be enough for our small life, and I would take care of our home. I cooked, I cleaned, I did all the things that made our lives easier. When his mother fell ill, I cared for her full-time until the end. I tracked our savings down to the penny, clipped coupons religiously, and never bought anything for myself without thinking it over for days. I believed in loyalty, in commitment, in us. Then, on a Tuesday in March, our entire world shifted. Daniel came home from the gas station with a gallon of milk and a scratch-off lottery ticket. I remember he forgot the eggs. I was slightly irritated at the time, but that small annoyance vanished when he scratched the card at the kitchen table and froze. 10 million, he whispered, gripping the ticket like it might blow away. I thought he was joking. He wasn't. By the end of the week, the win was confirmed. After taxes, we were set to walk away with more than $6 million in cash. Just like that, the life I knew began to dissolve. At first, I imagined how we might share in the joy. I pictured a little cottage somewhere in the Vermont hills, a small secondhand bookstore I could run part-time. Maybe we'd finally travel, to see the fjords in Norway or walk the streets of Prague, hand in hand. I thought this would be a new beginning for us. But Daniel had other plans. Within days, he quit his job without even telling me. I found out when the school secretary called to wish him well. He stopped wearing his usual clothes and began dressing in slim-cut designer jackets, browsing luxury real estate websites late into the night. His laughter grew louder, sharper, no longer the soft chuckle I had fallen in love with. I heard him on the phone one evening, telling someone, "I'm finally free." The words clanged in my ears like a dropped dish. I told myself it was just the excitement, that it would pass. But then came the morning I made French toast, his favorite, and he came downstairs in a suit I'd never seen before. He sat calmly, sipped his coffee, and told me, without a hint of emotion, "Now that I'm rich, I don't need a housewife anymore." I blinked. I thought I'd misheard. But he just kept eating, as though he'd said nothing out of the ordinary. "You were fine when we had nothing," he added, "but I'm not going to live like a schoolteacher anymore. You don't fit that life." He gave me 30 days to leave. I didn't cry. Not in front of him. Instead, I walked through the home I had nurtured for nearly 2 decades like a ghost. Folding sheets I had washed 1,000 times, polishing furniture I'd chosen with care, listening to Daniel talk loudly on the phone about luxury renovations and exotic trips I was no longer invited to. His cruelty wasn't loud or angry. It was quiet, calculated, cold, like a scalpel. He never raised his voice, never shouted. He simply erased me from the life we had built together, with a shrug and a smirk. He started throwing parties. Young women with loud laughter and plastic smiles floated through my home, while I was instructed to make myself scarce. So I did. I stayed upstairs, clutching a mug of tea, hands trembling, heart thudding. I began packing slowly. Not everything, just the things that mattered. My books, old letters from my mother, A watercolor painting of two doves that Daniel's mother had given me before she passed. I doubted he even remembered it existed, but I remembered. And I started writing. Not because I had a plan, but because I needed to remind myself that I was still real. In a worn journal I kept tucked away, I began to document everything. The things Daniel said, the money he spent, the people he brought home. I didn't know what I would do with it, but I knew this. He thought I would leave quietly, vanish like a chapter closed too soon. He didn't know me at all. The day after I realized Daniel wanted me gone, I called Linda Myers, a retired accountant I used to see every Sunday at church. She was unassuming, gray cardigan, no nonsense haircut, but there was something about her eyes, sharp like a hawk's. I didn't tell her everything, just enough to make her lean in across her kitchen table. She agreed to help. We started quietly. Daniel was too distracted to notice the email alerts when I requested credit reports, combed through old tax filings, and checked the status of our joint accounts. Linda showed me what to look for, what he had changed, what he hadn't. He had started moving funds into new accounts in his name only. It wasn't illegal, but it was loud with intention. He's not hiding it because he doesn't think you'll fight back, she said. Men like that don't change. The money didn't corrupt him. It gave him permission. It was a sentence that stuck in my ribs. I found myself returning to something I hadn't touched in over a decade. A locked metal box in our storage unit, filled with notes, vendor lists, and designs for a small stationery business I once dreamed of launching. I had called it Kindred Pages. At the time, Daniel had told me it was a cute idea but not worth the stress. He made it sound like he was protecting me. In truth, he was keeping me small, but I had kept everything. I called Linda and told her I wanted to revisit it, see if I could make something real out of it this time. She smiled in a way I hadn't seen before. "You're not thinking of making a move," she said. "You already did." With her help, and through a friend of hers named Valerie Ortiz, a former print shop manager turned freelancer, we got started. We worked in borrowed spaces, Linda's kitchen, the back room at the local community center, every surface covered in paper samples, ink tests, and sketches. Valerie helped me redesign the logo and produce test runs of journals and memory boxes. No one knew. Not Daniel. Not any of his cocktail party guests. While he boasted about a waterfront investment in Florida and a crypto startup pitched to him at a cigar bar, I was filing the paperwork to make Kindred Pages LLC official. And then something happened. A woman I vaguely remembered from town, now living in California, ordered a custom memory journal for her mother. She posted a video of herself unboxing it, tears in her eyes, whispering, "You can tell whoever made this put love into every inch." Orders started pouring in. Valerie and I could barely keep up. Linda managed the books, always reminding me not to grow too fast. "Sustainability is power," she said, tapping her pen. Meanwhile, Daniel called once. Just once. He left a voicemail about a blue kettle I might have left behind. I didn't respond. Instead, I drove past the house one evening. The lights were on. Strangers laughed inside. It was no longer mine, and yet somehow I didn't feel loss. I felt steady. This wasn't a comeback. It was a beginning. When I found out the house was back on the market, I felt something click into place. Not rage, not revenge, but something quieter, like clarity. Nancy Adams, the realtor, was surprised when I reached out. "You want to buy that house?" she asked, blinking. "I lived there for 20 years," I said calmly. "I'm not buying a memory. I'm buying a stage." Daniel's finances were in ruins. His Florida property had sunk into legal mess. The crypto venture had imploded, and he was being sued for fraud. He slashed the house price just to escape the taxes. 2 days later, my offer was accepted. No counter. No questions. The day I stepped back inside, it was silent. Empty. A skeleton of what it had been, but I didn't feel haunted. I saw possibility. Dust hung in the air like memory, but I wasn't there to reclaim. I was there to rebuild. With Valerie and Linda by my side, we began transforming the old house into something completely new. A boutique studio for Kindred Pages. Not just a store, a sanctuary. We painted the walls in warm honey and plum tones. We opened up the sunroom for seasonal workshops, added reading corners, writing circles, and display shelves for memory boxes and hand-bound journals. Valerie brought in local artisans, mostly women, who had been quietly trying to keep their crafts alive. We sanded, stitched, carved, and curated every inch. Opening day was in mid-October. No fanfare, just a few photos on Instagram and an invitation to the local paper. But the reporter, a young woman named Trina, fell in love with the space. 2 days later, her article dropped. From heartbreak to handmade, the woman who turned her ex-husband's mansion into a community jewel. I hadn't expected Daniel to see it, but he did. Marka walked into the studio kitchen that Saturday with her phone in hand. "He knows," she said, her voice half amusement, half steel. "He left a voicemail." I read the transcript. It was angry, mocking. "Do you have any idea how this makes me look?" he asked. I smiled. He thought he'd ended me when he kicked me out. All he'd done was set me free. The next week, a podcast reached out, this time not for scandal, but inspiration. I agreed. Sitting in the sunroom where Daniel once called me boring, I looked out over the replanted garden and spoke softly, truthfully. Silence isn't grace. Sometimes it's fear. I stayed quiet too long. Women began showing up at the studio, not just to shop, but to say thank you. One afternoon, a retired nurse whispered, "You reminded me I still have more chapters to write." Then, one morning, the bell above the studio door chimed. It was Daniel. He looked older, deflated. "I didn't think you'd actually buy it," he muttered. "I didn't do it to spite you," I replied. "I know," he said. "That's the worst part." I didn't follow him when he left. I had a class to teach. Winter came softly that year. The house no longer echoed with absence. It pulsed with warmth, with words, with laughter. Some say revenge is sweet, but I found something better. Peace. Now, when I walk through the studio, once a house that held my silence, I hear life. Pens scratching paper. Quiet laughter over shared memories. The rustle of journal pages turned by hands that are writing again, reclaiming again. I don't think about Daniel anymore. Not with anger. Not even with sadness. The part of me that once needed his recognition no longer exists. In its place is something sturdier. Self-trust, purpose, peace. Linda has fully retired now, though she still visits on Fridays for tea and a gentle scolding if I underprice the custom work. Valerie is training 2 apprentices, and we've partnered with a local women's shelter to offer monthly journaling sessions. We're not just a shop. We're a haven. A place where people come to find themselves in pages they didn't think they had left to write. I keep the old house keys on a handmade hook by the door, not as a trophy, but a reminder of everything I survived. Of the life I built when no one thought I could. Of the truth that sometimes the story doesn't end when the chapter closes, it begins. One morning, as I tidied up after a workshop, a woman paused at the doorway and said, "This place, it reminds me of who I used to be." I smiled and said, "That's exactly why I built it." Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, if it made you think of your own quiet strength, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Life Stories for more powerful, true tales. Every story deserves to be heard. Maybe the next one will remind you that your next chapter can begin at any time. Until then, keep writing, keep living, and never let anyone shrink the light you were born to shine.